Imagine a world of stone castles, of glittering crowns, and of power so absolute it could start wars, or make peace. In this world, the greatest risk wasn't a rival army or a peasant revolt. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a king could do was simply fall in love. Because for a king, love was never just a feeling, it was a political tool. A marriage was an alliance, a handshake sealed with a ring and a crown. The woman a king married was not a choice of the heart, but a pawn on a chessboard. She was chosen for her powerful family, her dowry, or her ability to produce an heir. So what happened when a king, a man of supreme authority, felt a pull towards someone else, a woman he couldn't marry, a person who was not a princess, or perhaps a person he was forbidden to be with in every possible way? These were the moments when the gilded halls of power became a stage for scandal, secrecy, and sometimes ruin. These are the hidden affairs they tried to erase from history, the stories of forbidden love that shook kingdoms to their very foundations. The king and the commoner. Our story begins in the turbulent, complicated world of 15th century England. The War of the Roses had plunged the country into a bloody civil war, a brutal struggle between two noble houses. In the middle of this chaos stood King Edward IV, a man of towering height and incredible charisma. He was a warrior and a leader, and when he finally won the crown for his family, he was the most eligible bachelor in Europe. Every royal family wanted to marry their daughter to him to secure an alliance with the new king. Edward's most trusted advisor and cousin, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, even had a plan. He was called the Kingmaker because he had helped put Edward on the throne. He traveled to France to arrange a strategic marriage for Edward with the French princess, a move that would solidify their power and bring a much-needed end to the conflict. But while Warwick was away, something unexpected happened. Edward was in his element, holding court and enjoying his new reign when a beautiful young widow named Elizabeth Woodville arrived. She wasn't a princess. She wasn't even from a truly powerful family. She was a commoner, a knight's daughter with 2 children from her first marriage. Elizabeth was there to plead a case. Her late husband had been a sworn enemy of Edward's house, and his family's lands had been seized. She was asking for her children's inheritance back. Edward, known for his love of beautiful women, was immediately captivated. He offered to return her lands if she would become his mistress. But Elizabeth, a woman of virtue and courage, refused. She stood her ground, telling the king she was not for sale. This defiance was unheard of. Kings were not used to being refused. But instead of anger, Edward felt a different kind of pull. This wasn't just physical attraction, it was a profound emotional connection to a woman who saw him as more than just a crown to be used. Ignoring all political advice, all common sense, and the warnings of his inner circle, King Edward IV married Elizabeth Woodville in secret. No big ceremony, no grand procession, just a quiet, intimate moment that changed the course of English history. When Warwick, the Kingmaker, returned to England, he was furious. His months of diplomatic work were now meaningless. He saw Elizabeth not as a queen, but as a dangerous influence. This forbidden marriage, a king choosing love over duty, was the beginning of a rift between Edward and Warwick that would eventually lead to Warwick switching sides and plunging England back into the very war Edward had just won. But for a brief, shining moment, Edward and Elizabeth's secret love affair defied all the rules. It proved that even a king, who held the fate of a nation in his hands, was still human enough to make a choice of the heart. The Duchess and the Doctor.
Now let's travel to the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, a century earlier, to a story of a different kind of forbidden love. A story not of a king and a commoner, but of a queen who chose to love a man who could not give her a kingdom. Her name was Caroline Matilda, and she was a British princess, the younger sister of King George III. When she was just 15 years old, she was married off to King Christian VII of Denmark. This wasn't a love match, of course. It was an alliance between England and Denmark. But her new husband, Christian, was not a good match for anyone. He was a brilliant but deeply troubled man, plagued by severe mental illness. His erratic behavior and violent outbursts made him unpredictable and dangerous. The young queen was utterly isolated in a foreign court. She was miserable. Her husband openly had mistresses and ignored her, and the court itself was a den of vipers, with nobles constantly plotting against each other. Then, a new person arrived at court, a German doctor named Johann Struensee. He was a physician, but also a man of the Enlightenment, brilliant and charismatic. He was hired to treat the king's madness, and remarkably, he was able to calm Christian's worst episodes and bring some stability to the court. Soon, he became more than just a doctor. He became the king's confidant, and then the power behind the throne. King Christian, in his moments of lucidity, trusted him completely and gave him more and more authority.
Meanwhile, the lonely young Queen Caroline was drawn to this intelligent, kind, and powerful man. He saw her not as a political object, but as a person. They shared a passion for the new, enlightened ideas sweeping across Europe, and they formed a deep, secret bond that went far beyond mere friendship. Their relationship became a love affair, and soon the whole court was whispering. It was a romance born of desperation and intellectual kinship. For a few years, they ruled Denmark together, in all but name. Struensee used his influence to pass radical reforms, abolishing torture and promoting freedom of the press. He was a visionary, but their relationship was a ticking time bomb. The old guard of the Danish court, the nobles who hated Struensee's reforms, saw their affair as the perfect weapon. They couldn't attack his policies, but they could attack his morality and his influence over the queen. In the dead of night, a group of conspirators stormed the palace. The king was a mere puppet in their hands. They arrested both Caroline and Struensee and charged them with treason. At the trial, Struensee confessed to the affair, hoping to spare the queen, but it was no use. He was found guilty of treason and executed in a brutal public spectacle. Caroline was sent back to England, exiled and disgraced. She would never see her children or her former life again. She died just a few years later, a broken woman at only 23 years old. The story of Caroline and Struensee is a tragedy. It's a reminder that in the cold world of royal politics, love was a luxury that could cost you everything. The king and the king's favorite. Now let's talk about a kind of love that was even more dangerous, even more scandalous in the medieval world. A love that wasn't between a man and a woman at all. This is the story of King Edward II of England and his favorite. Edward II was a weak and indecisive king, but a man of deep, passionate feelings. His father, the legendary Edward I, had tried to raise him as a fearsome warrior, but had failed. Edward II's one true love, his one great passion, was for a man named Piers Gaveston. Gaveston was the son of a Gascon knight, but his charm, wit, and skill at jousting made him stand out. He and Edward II had a deep bond.
And when Edward II became king, he showered Gaveston with titles and wealth. He even made him Earl of Cornwall, a title previously reserved for members of the royal family. But the nobles of the court, the powerful barons who controlled the country's wealth and military, were disgusted. They saw Gaveston as a low-born upstart who had the king's ear and was constantly insulting them. It didn't help that Edward II's fascination with Gaveston went far beyond a mere friendship.
The chroniclers of the time, monks who recorded history, tried to hide the true nature of their relationship. They would use careful, coded language, calling Gaveston the king's familiar or his favorite. But the whispers in the halls of the palace were not so careful. It was an open secret. The barons demanded that Gaveston be exiled, not once, but 3 times. Each time, Edward, heartbroken and desperate, would find a way to bring him back. His love for Gaveston was so strong that it blinded him to the political danger. He would ignore his duties, neglect his queen, and risk the very stability of his kingdom to be with this one man. Eventually, the barons had enough. They rose in open rebellion. They captured Gaveston and executed him. They thought this would force the king to come to his senses, but they were wrong. Edward II never recovered from the loss of Gaveston. His fury and grief consumed him, and he spent the rest of his reign seeking vengeance on the men who had killed his love. His reign became even more chaotic, more unstable. He found a new favorite, another man, and the cycle of anger and rebellion began again. Eventually, the king's own wife, Queen Isabella, who had suffered years of neglect and humiliation, had her revenge. She and her lover overthrew Edward II and had him imprisoned. Edward II's story ends in one of the most gruesome ways in all of history. He was likely murdered in a cruel and violent way, a direct result of his inability to let go of a love that was absolutely forbidden by the society he lived in. Edward II and Piers Gaveston's story is a tragic look into a different kind of love, a secret passion that was so scandalous it had to be hidden from history, and a bond that, for a medieval king, cost him his throne and his life.